the theme of this session is economy. And economy has to be people-centric, because we can throw out facts and figures like GDP, state domestic product, but if it doesn't make a meaningful difference in the lives of people, then who are we doing all this work for? And when the population is unhappy, when the population is frustrated, there is instability in society, and there is investment flees away, or investment, hesitates to come in. As you've heard in the previous sessions, both by the Honorable Chief Minister of Manipur and by the Honorable Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, that there is a lot of work that is happening. And I'm glad that you got a chance to listen to both of them. And you've seen that a lot of this work is being driven by public investment by the state government and investment by the central government. And that is both a blessing and challenge. It's a blessing because Northeast, of its unique history, gets a lot of government funds, multilateral funds, you get state government funds, so a lot of this goes into infrastructure and connectivity. And therefore rail, roads, highways, ports, all of this gets built up over time. But besides G2G, what about business? What about investment? What about B2B economic growth? What about B2C, business to consumer economic growth? What about consumer to consumer economic growth? What about the role of startups and entrepreneurs? And what opportunity does a young person in the Northeast have in order to contribute to the economic growth of his state and therefore the overall nation? That is what we are trying here to discuss and get your ideas and your experiences. And I know that for some of you, like Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhyay, he is very well versed with the Northeast and Southeast Asia. He understands the region very well. For some of you, it may be your first visit or your second visit. So therefore, I want you to think about, as a nation, as India, where are we going? So kind of you share your views from that perspective, that as a nation, what are the latest trends you're seeing? And in that evolution, in those trends, what is an opportunity for undiscovered regions like the Northeast or some other part of India, if you have more experience? And therefore, what are lessons we can take and what are mistakes that we can avoid? So, we want, while the focus is on Northeast, but obviously it has to be part of the overall growth story where India is and where the priorities of India lie, both in the private sector and the government sector. But first of all, when we're talking about government investment, I want to invite your views, Ambassador. The MEA is also, over the last decade and a half, pushed a lot of connectivity-based projects linking Northeast with Southeast Asia, whether it's through power and power projects between Tripura and Bangladesh, whether it's through highways, which is the the India-Myanmar Thailand highway, whether it's to ports, which is your port in Kaladan, and then the road linking to Moreh. So all of these projects have been going on and have been championed by the MEA for many years, yet they are also influenced by the political factors in Myanmar, and they are also influenced by the political factors in the Northeast, in some of our own states. And therefore, the intention behind, behind those projects, the grand design behind those projects which were set up many years ago, we have yet to realize that. We have not even completed the project, forget about getting the fruits of that project. So from your experience, would you like to, tell us what was the original intention of some of these projects? And then from your experiences, what are those political factors in Myanmar, in our neighboring countries, and in the Northeast that you feel has, slowed down the pace?
Thank you very much, Mr. Gogoi, for that leading question. So I think I could answer that in 2 or 3 ways. I mean, very clearly, you know, the desire for connectivity projects linking South Asia to Southeast Asia is driven by two reasons. One is, of course, if you look at it in a geopolitical context, they were started at a time when our opportunities to the west of India were closing. You know, you had the Iranian Revolution, you had Afghanistan, the relations with Pakistan were always bad. On the other hand, you had tremendous growth opportunities in East Asia, Southeast Asia, emerging tigers, and so on. So in many ways, starting from Prime Minister Narasimha Rao's time, the whole idea of the Look East was to take advantage of the opportunities coming from the East, as well as connect us to a region which we were historically and culturally connected back to the region. But it also, to that extent, it also meets the aspirations of the Northeast, because the Northeast does not just want to be at the periphery of India, it would like to be in the bridge between India and Southeast Asia. So I think, you know, it is driven by basically those compulsions. The challenges, one of the challenges that you posed was political. You know, we've had political challenges in the past with Bangladesh, we already have one with China. Technically speaking, in 1962, when the coup took place in Myanmar, the Myanmar border was closed. India and Myanmar are neighbors like any other neighbors. We practically forgot that they were neighbors. But over the last 10, 12 years, the opportunities opened up. Unfortunately, the military coup in Myanmar in February 2021 has once again reversed the situation. It's fallen off the media map, but the reality is that the whole country is up in flames. There is virtually a war of the people against the military right now. And so I think that road connectivity that we had been imagining is, for the time being, at least, I think, you know, really not going to go very far. But the real challenge, I feel, is really a challenge. You know, there's a lot of talk of connectivity, but we haven't addressed. In the morning, you spoke, Honorable Chief Minister of Arunachal, Pema Khanduji spoke about the production deficit of the Northeast. You know, the various statistics he quoted about what is the contribution to GDP, what is the contribution to trade exports. Unless the Northeast can harness its productive potential, and that productive potential must come from exactly what you said, economy is people. It must come from the people. And there, if we look at it, you know, 70 to 75% of the people of the Northeast live in one form or the other from land, water, forests, livestock, farming. And yet, I don't think successive governments have made the investments in the small farm capacities, how to develop the small farm capacities, to make them not only viable, but also sustainable and profitable. And that's where the gold at the bottom of the pyramid is. How we can tap the productive potential of our people who live in the rural countryside. We can talk about this in a greater degree, but I think, and the second thing that I would say is that, you know, as you said, this is MEA driven, but we have not had a proper all of government approach to that. So, you know, the finance ministry, the customs department, the trade department, the Northeast bodies, we don't actually have a body that can coordinate all the various perspectives from the sectoral, from the states, from the sectors, and from the various ministries. So I think these are two fundamental things that need looking into.
Thank you, Ambassador. As you rightly said at the end, that there is a whole of government approach which is missing, and the role of state governments is also essential. And yet these projects, even, you know, at some point need to see their fruition. Even though right now we're not exporting much items, most of our items are, I think the #1 item that exporting from the Northeast is tea. But nonetheless, once we do reach that, you know, we would need those projects to be completed, and maybe this is something that can be raised in the Northeast Council meeting, sir, Honorable Chief Minister, that, you know, the state of these projects and what happens, because again, it improves the infrastructure and connectivity, and it adds to the grander vision that the Government of India has for the Northeast. But let me ask you, Tarun, you've seen so many, you have heard so many remarks about the projects that are taking place in connectivity, the number of highways that are coming up, the rail connectivity, the airport connectivity. There are a lot of ports that is also being set up and improving the connectivity between India and Bangladesh. Now you come, and correct me if I'm wrong, from the warehousing sector, and therefore you have an understanding of logistics. So from a logistics and warehousing point of view, can you identify, what is the current state of your sector in India? And with the advent of e-commerce, with Northeast, the purchasing power of the Northeast people rising, also with Northeast being located so close to Bhutan, located to Nepal, Myanmar, Bangladesh, what is there a potential for growing the logistics and warehousing sector in the Northeast? So for first overall India picture and then the Northeast segment. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what happened with me, right? And that will answer how I see this. Right? I'm a chartered accountant, right? 3 years back when I started this company, the main reason why I got into warehousing, logistics, or supply chain was that the way I think India will go is we'll end up being a manufacturing country after a point of time, like maybe very close to China. And the way another part of the business world globally, internet connectivity, and the way our tech companies are doing, right? These two things will be the things which will determine how big a superpower we become. And that is why I started warehousing company. I thought India, if they continue to do manufacturing the way they are manufacturing and the focus is on that, warehousing supply chain will become a fulcrum, right? It will determine how businesses move ahead. If you see globally also, right, our warehousing supply chain logistic costs are almost double than what other countries have, right? So there is enough and more potential, and that's why government has come up with your logistic policies, figuring out how do we connect the country all across so that we can optimize warehousing logistic cost, right? And create national parks on the main hubs. So having said that, right, now if you come to a area like a Northeast, right, the advantage that we are sitting on is that this is the territory which has not been explored, right? And an outsider, right, whether it is somewhere from south or the west or the north, is not aware of the local flavors, is not aware what would work here, right? And that is where, like in the yesterday I've met people, right? The guys are very focused on what will happen to like Northeast, right? What is it that we are doing for Northeast, right? The founders whom I spoke to, the guys who are trying to do things, like they're very focused there. Like that is the approach that is needed to actually scale this part, right? Or in terms of warehousing and logistics, I'll tell you, right, when I started the business back in 2020, I needed a warehouse, full lockdown. I didn't know where to approach. I needed a warehouse in Shillong, I needed a warehouse in Meghalaya, Guwahati, I started a warehouse. Guwahati and Shillong are still there. Right? Finding a warehouse was tough. Right? Finding a person who can help me with the warehouse was tough. Right? Over the period, we have like scaled the business, we have hired people, and have been able to solve that problem. But if we can have certain synergies between local people who are running smaller businesses, aggregate those in some form, which helps give more exposure to them as well as us for this territory, right? I think that's when the growth will happen.
Excellent, thank you. And I think that takes me to Shanti. Shanti, coming from the background that you've come from of angel investment, and what Tarun talked about towards the end was a lot that what happens between startups and in potential investors. You need to connect the two. You need to find ways of bridging the gap, and you never know whether where the next Facebook or where the next Flipkart is coming from, or the next Ola is coming from. Is it coming from Pune? Is it coming from Shillong? Or is it coming from Chennai or Visakhapatnam? And the investment community that sits in Bangalore, or they're sitting in Asia, they're looking for the next big idea. And therefore, a lot of it is about connecting and finding ways to connect the two. So in your experience, what has worked? And therefore, do you think in your experience you will have some lessons for all of us as a nation, that both as potential investors we have to look for opportunities in the Northeast, We also have to make the effort to know the Northeast. It's not always that the Northeast has to come to us. It's also about us, to be driven by our conviction and understanding the talent and potential that exists in the Northeast. So therefore, what is your, experience about, bringing investors and startups and incubators? Could you share a bit about your experience?
No, thank you for having me. So first, I'll just take a step back and talk about the India macro story, right? Because we talked about, how is the bigger picture of India in the startup space. So today, we all know India is like the third largest in terms of startup ecosystem, right? So basically a very growing ecosystem. But, in my personal belief, I think this decade belongs to India, really, right? Because if you look at the innovations happening globally, I think the kind of innovations happening in India, we have not seen those innovations happening even outside of India, right? In terms of just the fintech, in terms of how fintech has just disrupted the way we actually make payments, right? And if you look at the last 5 years, I think there are two large trends which have happened in India. One is, of course, the Jio moment, which has brought internet connectivity to literally 600 million people, right? And then the UPI, which has created the payment infrastructure stack, which basically means you have internet and then you have payment, which can then lead to you creating commerce or social commerce in any part of the country, right? So for me, when I come to the Northeast, right, and people say I'm in the Northeast and that's why I do not have access or I cannot do this, I'm actually a little kind of taken aback, because I don't think in today's 2022, you have an excuse of not being able to build a large company even out of the Northeast, right? Because I think you have access to internet, you have access to information, you have access to a lot more infrastructure than what was available probably 10 years back, right? And really, when I started Let's Venture in 2013, the main question we were trying to solve was transparency and ease of access, right? So really, angel investing was like a big boys club, right? You had to be actually sitting in one of the large cities where you would then get access to founders. And founders also had to get the right access to investors. And that was the question we were trying to answer, is how can a founder sitting in a tier 3 city, right? I have invested in companies which are probably 60 kilometers away from Tirupati, right? Like really a tier 3 city, today close to doing about 25 crores in revenue, right? So I think what we try to do at Let's Venture is, how do I create equal access for a founder? How do I create equal ability to discover good founders for investors, right? And really answering your question, I think if we have to look at Northeast as becoming the hub of economic development, I think we have to have focus on entrepreneurship and startups. And I'm not saying this because it sounds very sexy to say that you are a startup founder, but I think it is required, because that's when the dynamic starts to shift and change, right? You need those small success stories of founders who are breaking away, because today they have access to internet, they have access to information. I think what we need to build is an ecosystem of people who are willing to give their time to mentor some of the founders. I met some amazing guys today during lunch, and I think they really want to build something out of Northeast. I think what they lack is that, somebody who is watching out for them. Almost that, right? So can I get an access to a network of mentors? Can I get access to business leaders who will actually put the time to develop the ecosystem? Because I think we need just that concerted effort for about 1 to 2 years, and we will see some very good technology, scalable companies emerge out of Northeast, as well as some very good, viable businesses starting to emerge out of Northeast. Right? Because I believe, everybody does not need to become a unicorn. We can build $100, $1 million businesses, and we would have changed the landscape of the Northeast, right? So really, how can we bring those two sides of the ecosystem together? And just the last point here is, from my learning of having built Let's Venture, I think what we miss sometimes in that entire conversation is that we give overt focus to founders. I think that is just one side of the marketplace, right? The other side is we have to encourage the HNIs, we have to encourage people who've created wealth through their own businesses to keep aside a small capital to actually infuse into startups. And I'm not saying that, you know, you go and blindly write capital into a startup which you think does not deserve your capital. You do your curation process, right? But you start the process of allocating your asset a small percentage. You can just keep aside 5%, 5%, right? But basically keep aside that and start investing, because unless that investor and the startup ecosystem does not come together, you cannot build the entire ecosystem in one place, right? I mean, though we've tried to do that at Let's Venture, right? Today we have investors from 60 countries on the platform who are investing into the India story. You know, and I meet investors constantly from outside India, and my belief is that, like I said, this decade is going to belong to the Indian founder, right? We are seeing the changes happening because this decade's founder is actually the CXOs of last decade, right? They have already seen the growth of the Indian ecosystem. They have seen large scalable companies being built. They have seen venture being raised. They understand the playbook, right? So for them, they can accelerate their journey and very quickly grow and build a very valuable, mature business, right? But I think what we need is we also need a little bit of that local heroes, local examples, because that helps the founder know that he can now aspire to build a much larger venture.
Thanks very much, Shanti. I know there are many in our associate fellows group who are startup entrepreneurs themselves, and I think what you said really echoes with them, and in my conversations with them they often say the same thing. But tying back to what Honorable Chief Minister Manipur said, also that it is a mindset that we need to change, that just because you're in the Northeast that we have these certain disadvantages. I think when we go from a I don't have to I can do, and then you'll try and figure out opportunities, because as you said, in the era of internet and e-commerce and technology, and there is already an awareness about the Northeast amongst many. So there is the disadvantages that were felt maybe 20 years ago are not there today. But Vikalp, I think you asked a very interesting question, which is because to the Honorable Chief Minister Arunachal Pradesh, that when we talk about connectivity, yes, we talk about transport connectivity, so that's rail, road, air, ports. There is also energy connectivity, so you produce electricity via coal, via renewable energy, via solar, via biogas, and then at the same time, how is that connected to the grid? And from the grid, how does it go to the consumer and the paying? So there's the entire energy connectivity infrastructure, but what you talked about was communication connectivity, whether it's through mobile or whether it's internet, and how can we leverage the changes that have come in technology over the last 5-10 years to deliver some of our welfare services like health and education and be better at delivering them. So again, the same perspective I would ask, what do you see, what excites you when you see the changes in technology-based services in India, and where do you think we are going? And I'll ask you a follow-up question, but why don't you give us, your macro, and give us your what do you call your crystal ball scenario.
Thank you for asking me a tech question. If you would ask an economic question, I would have passed. I'm a technologist developer, and I think the way I think about technology is a level player, right? You look at other infrastructures, right? It's basically electricity, road, all of that is important. But suddenly a profound communication technology, internet, all of that comes in, and it just supersedes and says that now I can deliver exposure, now I can deliver information, now I can deliver value to the end consumer and businesses without them getting connected physically, right? So that's a profound nature of technology. I'll give you some examples. If you try to do a KYC in the US, right, it's one of the foremost like country from an economic standpoint, it takes 2 to 3 days, sometimes few hours. If you want to do KYC in India, it takes 30 seconds, right? And that's purely because of technology, right? Similarly, Shanti spoke about UPI, how easy it is to transfer money. And on the same breath, my question was to Honorable Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, and I've heard this from our Honorable Prime Minister as well. Luckily, I got a chance to build Arogya Setu during the COVID time, and thank you so much. And me and my team have seen that, right? How technology can actually change the way you contact trace. And it started with a newspaper article in Kerala. Kerala, there was a newspaper article. If you visited all of these places, come visit the public healthcare service center so that we can test you to COVID for COVID, because a COVID patient has gone there. Now look how difficult it is to contact trace in that way, but technology comes in and solves it. Similarly, if you look at Northeast, right, there are terrains, there are places which is difficult to reach physically, and it's the geology. Nothing you can do about it, right? That's how it is. Look at, there's a very interesting doctor I met because I'm running a startup on health. He basically runs a services in Scotland. He's an Indian, but he's based out of Scotland. Scotland also, there's a unique problem. There are multiple islands. And when you have to visit a doctor, you have to take a ferry. You have to go to that island, visit a doctor. Now think about it, if you are a 60-year-old and somehow rest of the world is growing older while India is still young, it's very hard. So they have converted the entire follow-up of your medication and your health journey over telemedicines. And that kind of a technology change, if we can bring about, it will be a step change. It won't be incremental change in the progress. It suddenly changes the whole game altogether, and we won't be talking about, okay, it'll take 5 years or it'll take 10 years. You'll just leapfrog if you leverage the technology that is available. And I think Northeast is at the cusp of it. Like India have leveraged the technology and leapfrogged when it comes to the way fintech operates. We never saw desktop computing. We only saw mobile computing. And mobile just made everyone connected. Similarly, what is it that Northeast can take away from this whole digitization paradigm that is going around to make sure that it's a leapfrog, a step change, and not necessarily a incremental change? I think that's the macro view that I can share on technology.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think all of you have shared your own fantastic ideas in terms of warehousing, and therefore in the future of warehousing, the role of technology and how technology can help us maneuver the issues of terrain and soft soil that we often face in infrastructure-based projects. And you talk about mindset and how there's nothing stopping us from being the next unicorn or the next big startup. And Ambassador talked about that, how people are, and communities at the end, rural communities of the Northeast are at the heart of this. They are not just recipients of government largesse, but they are also your innovators, and they're your partners in development. But as I said, we also have the honorable chief ministers, and we have people from the government and from academia. So if I were to ask you, in your respective experiences and journeys, what do you see is the role of the public sector, if I were to put it broadly? So that means central government, state government, public universities, public government think tanks, local body institutions, district administrations. Where do you see the public sector engage or synergize in your area of work? Because for us, we are not in the startup space. We are not in the private sector space, but yet we want to be partners in this space. So therefore, all of you have your idea of what India needs to do or what the region needs to do. And therefore, if you have the Honorable Chief Minister here and many members of the government of Manipur, what would be your ask from the public sector in order to improve the economic story of India and the Northeast in specific. Ambassador, would you like to start?
Sure, if you like. It's not exactly my territory, but, but you know, I think very simply.
You can, even from your experiences of, you know, working with communities and community NGOs, and you understand the exports that are coming from this and the border trade that happens as well.
So let me just answer that in two ways. One is, I think the single most important thing that the government can do is to build that contact and trust. A lot of that is missing. In the village where I stay, the government is visible for education and health, but it's not really visible for agriculture, it's not really visible for irrigation, it's not visible for afforestation, it's not visible for environment in many ways. And people don't even know that the government is there that you can go to, you know, for the biggest need is know-how. People are willing to do things, but they don't, maybe they don't know. A farmer does not know how to tap IT expertise. So there is a whole area of what I would say is hand-holding, technical know-how. Of course, you know, credits and all those things also come into the picture. And just the government should be there. I think we saw some remarkable examples in the interview with Honorable Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh. What the government can do when it is responsive to the public. And I think that's really what is most of all required. And, you know, the second thing I would say is that it should not come from a kind of top-down perspective. In a way, the government has to put itself where the common man is and then kind of create an environment which is, you know, which is conducive for them to be able to access all kinds of services.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think in my role as a member of the Standing Committee on Finance, I often engage with public sector banks and heads of public sector banks, and I often encourage them or nudge them to give more loans to businesses in the Northeast. And often they are giving retail loans for housing or purchase of a two-wheeler or an automobile. But to new business and startup businesses, they're still a bit wary, or if they are the public sector banks, if they are giving businesses, it's essentially to the tea sector or the big cement players who are already well established, or to some new entrants in the healthcare sector. So healthcare entrepreneurs, those who are setting up boutique hospitals or boutique schools, that's where the, you know, finance is going from a bank point of view. So that's, you know, what I'm trying to do. But why don't you, you know, share your views?
So honestly, I think this is probably the most open government, right? I mean, you have the Chief Minister sitting and listening to us. I have not attended a lot of events where, you know, the policy makers.
Please go and tell your friends to come to the next annual conclave of Leaders Connect.
The policy makers are actually wanting to kind of get feedback. So that's the first great step, right? Because you already have people who want to change some things. But I think keeping that apart, I think there are two things we can do. One is probably look at creating sandbox, innovation sandbox around particular sectors, right? And that is basically you create some boundaries and actually allow founders to build innovation around those sandboxes. And, you know, that has to be decided by the policymakers here and what will actually work for the state, right? And where you would want the new innovation to come from, right? So that could be...
So you can maybe have an agricultural or agri-tech based innovation sandbox as well.
Sandbox, right? Because I am part of the Karnataka State Council and we actually created a sandbox around EV, right? And we said... Electric vehicles, right? So, and we said, let's see what subsidies can we give. Can we create special places where they can go test their cars, right? So we did a lot of that because then what happens is the founders have a place to go to experiment and test and then take it to market, right? So that is
Can you elaborate more on the initiative of the Karnataka government?
Yeah, so basically here what we have created is a sandbox for anything to do with EV. And we are now providing infrastructure support for battery charging, right? We're actually providing subsidies for people who want to build in the EV space, right? So some of those couple of things, and then actually go call out for applications for anybody who is now wanting to build in that space. And I think a very similar approach can be taken here, where you and you know, honestly, you have IIM Shillong, you have IIT Guwahati, you have NIFT, right? You have a design, you have a marketing, you have an engineering, like the leading premier institutes of the country in this region, right? They have to come together and then maybe say that how can we come together to find those opportunities and create those policy sandboxes, right? That is one. And I think second, and I'm coming back to what I said earlier, I think it is very important for the successful business owners in this region, as well as successful entrepreneurs and people who've already created wealth, to enable further wealth creation, right? And that can happen only if you are willing to write a small check into a founder and work with him, because you know you have been able to build a business, and sometimes we underestimate the value of what a successful business leader can bring to the table. And he need not be a tech person at all, right? Just the basics of building a company. How do you think of revenue? How do you think of monetization? How do you think of customer acquisition? This does not change between a technology company and a traditional business. A business is a business because at the end of the day, you want to create shareholder value, right? That is the very common objective for any business. And if we can bring that community together and actually create some kind of a framework for them to start saying that I will be an investor and I will be an early investor. And I know, you know, this is not possible because the tax department is at the central level and there is nothing a state can do, because I have tried this a lot with other states, right? Like, can we give a tax incentive to people because they have invested? That's not possible, and that goes outside our scope of how we can work within the state, right? So just staying within the state, I think it is important to start evangelizing private market investing, right? How can you create wealth through private markets? How can you become an angel investor? And as an angel investor, how can you then contribute back? Because when that cycle starts to move, right, the flywheel will start to move, right? Because you will invest in probably 20 companies, one will break out, and that will then further inspire everybody to kind of go and invest. A lot of investors who've actually made money will then go on to start companies, right? So that is a very, very virtuous cycle which could actually create wealth, which could create economic development, which could actually improve aspirations. It can literally start the snowball effect on everything around the ecosystem after that.
Thank you. Tarun, I don't think after this conclave we'll have any issues finding warehousing space in any of the Northeast states, whether it's Mizoram, Manipur, Sikkim. So I think, you know, you should take us out for coffee, you know, for giving you this access. But again, you know, going back to the same question, you know, what is your ask? You know, people like yourself in the industry space, not knowing what to do, where to go. Obviously, they are the chambers of commerce, business associations. But again, you know, what is the ask from the public sector, whether it's think tanks, research, universities, the IITs, the IIMs, the public sector banks, the state governments, or the, you know, the central government?
See, again, I will answer this question based on my experience as a CA, right? I have seen GST regime now, right? I have seen VAT, I have seen excise, right? Honestly, if you ask me, right, if I see it from my CA's perspective, right, not much has changed. I, as a business, right, which is only 3 years old, I have 23 GST registrations. And at the end of every month, I have to file those 23 registrations, GST documents, returns, and everything else. While
so spoken like a true CA,
yeah,
you've gone to straight to tax.
Yeah, yeah. No, so I'm not saying that avoid the tax, right? Sure, sure. Make it easy for businesses to work, right? Right from filing returns to incorporating companies. It should be much easier, right? So that a college pass out guy can go and file register a company. And he should not regret doing it, right? There should not be those many compliances. A lot of things have been done from like what was 15 years back, but a lot still is desired. Because back then it was a 25-year-old, 30-year-old guy who was trying to do it. He had access to a lot of people experience, right? Now we want a 18-year-old to form a company, right? So we need to think it from his perspective. Can we do that, right? Everything is digitized, right? So every money that I'm collecting as a business, the government knows about it. So why should I file a return? Right? I think something like that should be done. The second thing which I feel, and I think it's across the globe, someone needs to change is the education system. Right? A country like ours, where we are teaching like God knows what in history, what in geography and everything else, we should teach skill, right? Teach business, teach
common sense, right? Where then people know how to actually make money. Because end of the day, that is what will ensure that the country progresses. Those are the two things which I feel are the most important part.
Thanks, Tarun. I think many of us agree that it is very important, at least for people and young people in Northeast, not to be afraid of entrepreneurship and not to have this mental block vis-a-vis with business. You know, as Shanti said, the principles are very basic. It's about acquiring customers, creating wealth for your shareholder, you know, revenues and tax. But, you know, we are trying to, I think that's the approach that has been there in the Northeast and across, I think, India as well. But specifically the Northeast, where traditionally business and entrepreneurship was always, you know, seen as very risky, and therefore, as said in the opening remarks, we all look for we are risk averse and look for the safe government job, even though it might be low paying. But, you know, going back to your point on education, and this is where, you know, I want to bring you, is that, you know, in terms of technology, you know, we have our state boards, therefore we have, and we have the education system and we have colleges. You know, in order to prepare the technologists of tomorrow, the creators, I won't even say engineers, but just I would say the technologists of tomorrow, what changes would you like to see in the education system? I assume you've come from an engineering background, so, you know, what changes would you like to see, not at higher education, but at least in the basic schooling? We went in the morning in which we're trying to put in some, inculcate some good values right from the beginning in government schools. But again, in terms of technology, you know, how do we prepare, you know, young students in Northeast for 3D and for AI and for all drone technology? How do we prepare? Because not everybody will go into and will get a seat or clear the IIT, but yet they might have the potential. So how do we create this mass? And other than that, if besides the changes in the education system or your, you know, your ask, what else would you like, again, as I said, you know, because of your experience of building Arogya Setu, you've seen, you know, a massive health-based, let's say, tracking system being developed. You know, what, from that experience, what are the 2-3 other areas where we, you know, state governments and Government of India can create products which will just help, you know, deliver our welfare services better?
No, thanks. I'll maybe take the second question first. On what government can do, what I feel, and rather than taking an example of Arogya Setu, I'll take an example of my previous company that I co-founded, GoIbibo, which is a travel company, and very relevant for us in Northeast. One of my asks, and you hit the nail on the dot when you said that banks and credits and all. See, India is a country of micro-entrepreneurs, right? And entrepreneurs is not about people building a businesses that is scaling to billions of dollars. It's about that lady selling noodles on the street. And she basically also needs credit so that she can now have 2 shops. She also wants to grow. She also has an aspiration that she can open a restaurant. She's doing a great job. So I think one way government should think about is how to build those micro-entrepreneurs, be it tech, not tech. To take an example of how this can change the tourism industry.
So do you want to throw out a suggestion?
Yeah, yes. So the way I see is, and Honorable Chief Minister spoke about this, that when the Zero Festival started, suddenly hotels started appearing, homestays started appearing. Now, if I look and say that in Northeast, we have to create an inventory of 5-star or 4-star rooms in next 3 to 4 years, it's a really hard job, right? But if I suddenly change the paradigm and say, I want to create homestays, that basically gives you a 4-star experiences by building these micro-entrepreneurs. That's fairly easy, right? And that's where a government can build right kind of policies, right kind of framework that not only allow such kind of micro-entrepreneurs to come up, but more incentivize. Because eventually when a government is working with Radissons and Taj of the world, they are giving the land, they are giving the resources. How that resources can be shifted in a decentralized way to a larger population base. So that would be my suggestion or an idea, more from a tourism standpoint, and it can apply to many other things.
And in education.
Yeah. So incidentally, I mean, I am educated in Northeast. So my first, second, third standard happened in KV Khanapara in Guwahati, and then my education is also in NIT Silchar. So a lot, whatever I am is to Northeast. I think one of the way I see Indian education system tries to make people do more jobs, like job oriented. It's where you have to, and that's what our parents also do, right? My parents, they wanted me to be in army so that my life is set, right? I don't have to struggle throughout. And that's the way we have grown. Education system can change that. I mean, there will be a lot more intellectual folks who can think about what we should teach. But if there is more about following what you feel as a problem and solve for it and be bold about it, education system can instill those emotions in students. And in a lot of places, why do we see that a lot of startups are coming up from IITs or NITs or IIMs? These guys are bold, right? They eventually, the whole culture and the ecosystem has instilled that emotion. How can we take it to a grassroots level? Because innovation doesn't stop there. And an education system can definitely solve for it. But I'll leave rest of the curriculum to the more informed ones, and I'll keep myself to the emotion. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We also have a lot of our associate members here, members who might have, similar experiences, or they might also like the opportunity to advise the Honorable Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh or the government of Manipur. So I would like just to reach out to the associate fellows. If any of you would like to maybe shortly just share your suggestion, or if you have any question, please feel free and raise your hand. If anybody would like to share your experience. Okay, so we have Roshan, and Roshan, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so hi, Gaurav, thank you so much. Great panel. Question to Shanti. And Shanti, of course, I have the privilege of knowing West level as well. She's one of our earliest investors in my company, Mobillion. Shanti, my question to you is that I think this is largely important for a lot of entrepreneurs in Northeast India. I think the disconnect I saw when I started up in 2020 in Guwahati, my startup, was it's very difficult to get investors. When startup founders predominantly tend to rely on government capital or government grants. How do you think...
Roshan, your mic is not that clear, so I will just urge you to speak a bit slower.
Yeah, so Shanti, just to repeat the question, how do you think, let's say most of the investors are based in Bangalore, let's say, how do you think VCs can deploy some part of capital to support Northeast startups?
So, just to make a point here, most of the investors are online today on Let's Venture, right? So we have maybe about 20–30% of the people who are from tier 1 cities. But like I said, we have investors from 60 countries on the platform, right? And I think the way we have to do it is that we cannot think that we come from the Northeast. I think, like I said, I think it's a switch you have to flip in your head, right? Saying that today I am an entrepreneur building a business, and let me see what is my best chance to go raise capital from an investor. And at Let's Venture today, we have an online pitching session. You can go submit your entire profile online. Very rarely do people really look at which region are you coming from, right? Only after in fact, I have made few investments where after I wrote the check did I realize that the guy is coming from a tier 3 city, right? So it's really about the idea, and it is about the investability of the idea. And like what I would really urge founders here to do is just ask for help. I think I do it every day, right? When I don't know something, I'm very shameless as a founder, right? And you have to be. You have to seek for support if you think you don't understand what you have to do the next step. And I'm so sure that you will be able to find your first believer, your first person who is there unconditionally for you, who is helping you build that vision out bigger. But I think at the end of the day, the onus lies with the founder, right? You cannot push that away. in the sense that, you know, not finding an investor because I'm sitting in the Northeast, not finding a mentor because I'm sitting here. I think I will not take those as anymore as a narrative which is very encouraging, because in the last 2 years, COVID has been a leveler, right? We've had founders now go sit in Leh and Ladakh and go build companies because they are like, you know, I have very less distractions. You know, if actually you look at it in the Northeast, you don't have the distraction and the compulsion to go to a pub every Friday just because all your friends are going. So you have to now go because you have to fit in, right? You don't have those kind of compulsions. So you have a lot more time, right, to actually go build it out. So for me, in my mind, like I said, the COVID has been a huge leveler in terms of just access to opportunities. But, you know, coming back to your point, Roshan, I am also working with a small group of people in near Darjeeling. And, you know, just coming back to the earlier point on education, you know, we are today offering Zoom classes from people around the world to these children sitting in the village. They are so hungry to learn more, right? So I think sometimes we tend to put a lot of expectation on the government saying, you know, you have to go change the entire education system. I think while the basic access to education is the most important part, the next level of access has to be enabled by the community who is actually managing the education. I don't think we can keep expecting the government to go understand every detail on what each student wants and then build out the education stack, because then you can actually put on Zoom, you can put a process, there are a lot of people who are willing to give time, and that same concept goes on to a founder, right? So I would really not, I don't have a really good answer to that, because I don't think investors are not investing because you're sitting in Northeast. I think they're not investing because you're not investing enough time in building your vision out to become bigger and to become a lot more global.
Just want to remind, you know, when we're talking about startups, not everything has to be related to information technology or to something related to the web as well. Because, you know, when we were discussing in Tawang, all the members of the Northeast Leaders Connect, we were discussing, okay, in terms of the Northeast, what is our unique comparative advantage? You know, what are the things that we can export as Ambassador said, which has a unique brand, as well as we know that in terms of value, it's actually better than some of our competitors in other states. And that's part of our Tawang Declaration, which I encourage all of you to read and get a copy of. And we had said that our region has inherent potential, particularly in the fields of tourism, nobody can doubt that, organic agriculture, horticulture, food processing, handicrafts, music, sports, and IT-enabled services. So in all of these sectors, as I mentioned, you can be an entrepreneur, you know, and get the help from others. But, you know, I just want to ask a question to the larger audience over here. I mentioned these fields, which I'll do that again. Tourism, organic agriculture, horticulture, food processing, handicrafts, music, sports, and IT-enabled services. So I want to do a quick poll. How many of you who are sitting in the audience would like to be an entrepreneur or would like to be, you know, start something of yourself or start your own venture in any of the fields that I mentioned? Please raise your hand. Excellent. How many of you want to be in the Indian Foreign Service or IAS or IPS? Okay, so you have to do a lot of capacity building work also to kind of get the, because if all the talent goes to the private sector, then what will happen and who will implement Honorable Pemaji's vision? So good, one more hand raised. So again, but you know, therefore we just have 10 minutes. So my last two questions I expect, you know, from those who raised your hands, please go ahead, person in the white shirt, please go ahead and ask your question and introduce yourself as well, please.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Asper Thayanjo and I'm from Manipur. My question would be open to the panel. Considering the fact that we're talking about the unlocking the economic roadmap of the Northeast, and human resources are a very essential part of the pool or the element for the economic unlockment. So my question would be, how do we tap the potential of human resources in the Northeast, and what are the challenges that lay ahead? As the panel members rightly mentioned about skills, I would like to understand more about the particular focus on skills at grassroots levels that the young people of Northeast could inculcate so as to have a synergy with the rest of India, or like to elevate more towards that platform. Thank you very much.
So again, question to the panel is, how can we increase our investment in human resource development, capacity building, talent and skills? So if any one of you would like to take that, yeah, go ahead.
Maybe I won't be the direct answer to the question, but I'll give you an advantage that I see specifically that Northeast has. And Honorable Chief Minister Sir mentioned that there's this business mindset that is something that we need to inculcate, and there's a cooperative societies or cooperative way of doing stuff. It should be encouraged. But there is an advantage, at least I see in this room. And Ambassador Sir, you spoke about productivity. You spoke about humans, they are productive. And if I look at Northeast, and if I look at this room, the female contribution to the productive or economically productive workforce is far higher than rest of the country. And you can see it all around. Look at this leaflet as well. 50% of participation is from female in the associates of YLC. So I think that's a very big advantage, and somehow that should be nurtured well, because that goes a long way. When I look at China, I mean, their female participation in economy is very high. When I look at India, it's abysmal, right? So that's one area where I think Northeast is doing really well and should continue to do. On the, I think, skill development, I would definitely, again, go back to the same, if government and bodies can work on making sure that they create environment where risks are celebrated, rather than getting into a situation where it becomes a failure. Yeah.
So, did you have a question? Yeah, please go ahead. We have Lar Singh Ming as well.
Yeah, so in keeping with the theme, thanks. So in keeping with the theme of this conversation, my question is directed to Shanti. Shanti, essentially two questions. One is, if you were given a corpus to head a fund, a hedge fund, let's assume hypothetically by the government of India, yes, towards investment into this region, which would be the three sectors that you would perhaps, identify as being the sectors where you'd put in your investments in? And secondly, of course, for the benefit of prospective entrepreneurs here, as an investor, what do you look at most in terms of, besides the business plan and everything else, in a prospective founder or entrepreneur before eventually putting in your investments?
So thank you for that. So I have actually invested in Roshan's company, and I was in fact thinking about it after I responded to the question. Really, if you look at, and I'm going to answer the second question first, right? Really what you look at when you invest as an investor, as an angel investor, is, whether this founder is going to be resilient enough to sustain the next 5 to 10 years, right? And what is the probability of giving up the journey? And I know it's a very hard parameter to kind of define, but really you know it when you talk to founders and when you start interacting with a lot of founders on their ability to stay focused on the bigger picture and the mission, and why are they solving the problem they are trying to solve, right? So that if they are able to articulate what is the problem they are trying to solve and why is it important to solve that problem, I think then the business kind of starts to build around it, because then they are able to find ways to solve the problem. You may not be solving it the first time the right way, but you will actually find a way to solve the problem, right? So really that is the first point for me. And second is, of course, like a deal breaker almost, is just ethics and just about being honest about what you know and what you don't know, right? And sometimes founders think that having hustle is just about you know, changing your story every time and constantly talking about big picture. But I think that does not work very well when you start interacting with a lot with the founder, because they carry that same ethics into their workplace, into the kinds of people they hire, into the way they deal with customers, right? And everything starts to be built on something which is not real, right? So for me, those are the two big things. And of course, besides that, you know, is the market big enough, right? Do the founders have the founder market fit, I call it, right? Really, are they trying to solve a problem in the space they deeply understand? Because sometimes the nuances of building a business is actually about understanding the next level of detail than just trying to read something and trying to go build a business, right? Because if somebody is today going to build something around tourism in Northeast, I think they will know exactly where the gaps are and where they can actually solve, or where is it that I have faced a problem when I'm actually building that solution, right? So really that is the answer to the second question. But in terms of the first question, and I'm going to kind of talk about from my own thesis, because I run a small fund, about a 25 crore fund, where, you know, I have written check to about 18 companies. And the only reason I did that is because I love working with founders. And sometimes I think you have to get a right to be on their cap table, right? It is about really, as an investor, you're fortunate when a good founder accepts your capital, right? Because they have a lot of capital available. And as an investor, you want to create enough value so that the founder says that I'm happy to take the capital, right? So really that was the thinking behind kind of creating the fund. But really, if I look at the Northeast, and I'm amazed the more and more I meet people, because I have been actually coming to this region in the last 2 years. I have actually worked closely with a couple of incubators. I've also been mentoring few founders. I think the aggregation opportunity of tourism and travel is still very untapped, right? And when I'm saying this is not about delivering the experience of travel, but it is about aggregating the information around travel, right? Which is basically aggregating homestays, aggregating tour guides. And in fact, you know, there was a Champions of Change event which happened with Narendra Modi, sir, when he had actually become the Prime Minister in 2015. And I remember one of the things he had said is that by 2025, and we are like 3 years away today, there should be one company where any guide or any tour operator can go and actually register, and you should be able to find that person with a rating. And I've always been thinking why that is not there, because India is still a very large tourist country, right? So really aggregation of information and removing information asymmetry, if any company can do anything around that, and that's why I invest a lot in marketplaces, because I believe the moment there is information asymmetry, there is an opportunity to disrupt, right? And that's exactly what we did at Let's Venture, where there was an information asymmetry between founders and investors. And the moment that information becomes your competitive advantage, it's very bad for that ecosystem, right? Because you cannot be better than me just because you have more information than me. You should be better than me if you're able to make a decision faster than me, right? And how do you change that? So if I were to look at a thesis in Northeast, I would actually look at marketplaces which are removing information asymmetry. And that could happen in any space. Today, like an example I'm giving is about maybe homestays. That's what comes right up in my mind now, in terms of just creating access to the best tour guides, the best access to the best homestays, right? Can I reward people for being the best and help them get discovered, right? So that is one I would certainly look at. Second is, I actually still believe education. There is a lot of things which has to be done around education, and it is not just online and tech-enabled education. I think there is a need for cohort-based education. And I think cohort-based, community-based education is going to change the way education is going to be delivered, as well as the way education will be adopted by the masses. That is where the real change, because if education was so great, right, then Udemy, and we have a lot of, you know, online sites where people can go and learn. But if you look at traditionally, people are dropping off at 40–50%, right? Because there is no community and cohort around that education which is being delivered, right? So that is that would be the second. And the third for me, which I am investing actively from my fund, is the creator economy. And that is basically anybody who's very good at music. So I've already invested in about 5 companies around creator economy. And I think creator economy space could become very big in the Northeast because people naturally love music. Like yesterday I was talking to someone and they said, I have so many things I do outside my job. Like I do music, I do art, and that comes naturally as a flavor to people here, right? So I think creator economy, if we are able to bring people online through the creator economy models today, I think I would love to invest in a company which is able to do that.
Thank you, dignitaries. I think we have come to the end of our session, but thank you for providing. I'm sorry, you'll have to, if you have a question, please feel free to approach them outside. We have to respect the next session and the delegates who are waiting to share their views. But thank you again for providing some very valuable thought leadership. And if there is one takeaway from me and one to keep in mind for the future, is that we have to use technology to build communities, and whether that's communities of producers and sellers, communities of content creators and content buyers and advertisers, communities of farmers and technical trainers and buyers, or whether, to community of sports persons and coaches and physicians and physiotherapists. So I think we have to ensure how do we use technology to beat the disadvantage of geography and distance. And I think, that is something that government also has a role to play in. Public-private partnership obviously is one way of doing it, but also encouraging innovation as well. But I think for a lot of the things that I heard, I think, just lacking access to information, lacking access to a potential investor, or lacking access to technical inputs, or lacking access to fellow producers. So therefore, can you aggregate the production of tea, not through big tea companies, but through small tea growers, or small spices, not through big spice corporations, but through small growers as well. So thank you, everyone, and thank you to the dignitaries on dais, and on to our next session. Thank you very much.